Some time has passed since our last recap for Star Trek Adventures and our campaign to know the unknown. This episode, our second full episode, not counting the pilot, is called Siege Perilous, although this time I did not reveal the title to the group until now. Star Trek Adventures has been something of an adventure for me, and I believe for the group as well. Another different or challenging exploration of how to play a role-playing game. We embarked on a similar journey when we decided to do Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars, a game which, the way that it's constructed, helps to bring an easy marriage, or maybe not so easy for some, but an easy marriage between old school skill and new school mechanics into a happy blend where one side can learn from the other. Very interesting and enjoyable experience for us. Star Trek Adventures likewise presents a similar blending, but of different elements, in my opinion, anyway. There are schools of thought in how to prepare for a session out there among role-playing gamers, and one of those is about improvisation versus preparation. Now, I don't really want to get into that debate, certainly not in this recap. And I certainly don't believe that improvisation, good improvisation, can happen without preparation. But there is something going on in Star Trek Adventures which encourages a certain type of planning. And one way that you can explore it, and the way that we have chosen to explore it, is to try and create a feel of an episode of television. You can embrace it to differing degrees. You can go in the direction that we have, which I'll describe in this recap, or your own way. It's not forcing you into anything, but it does ask you to envision scenes in a slightly different way than you may have done before. And then, once those scenes are in place, it compels you to improvise. It's a very interesting situation to be in. Mechanically supporting improvisation built from a base of preparation. It's bringing these two things together very openly, either to learn those skills or to learn how to blend those skills or to think about those skills in a different way. Now, we have now had 5 sessions together as a group, 2 for the first episode, 3 for the second, plus our pilot, plus character creation and system learning sessions, and plus I've had the benefit of being a player myself. So I have quite a few thoughts on the system, which are still going to change as we get more experience with it. But the way this particular recap is going to be organized is I'm going to recap the events of each session and separate those events by commentary on that session, because each one was quite different. So let's get to session 1 of episode 2, Siege Perilous. We've decided to begin each episode with the concept of being in the living room of the typical family during the late 80s, early 90s, actually settling down on the sofa, on the floor, and armchairs around the television and waiting for the episode to begin. And I begin with some kind of family dynamic, and then as the episode starts, we push in on the screen. Now, I don't do a lot of description of camera angles. I don't talk about camera movements and things like this during the session, because quite honestly, I don't get a lot of enjoyment out of framing scenes that way. And we don't have a lot of time to play, so any improv like that on my part to externalize visualizations steals time away from getting things done. So it doesn't happen. But I do take a few minutes at the beginning of the session and at the end of the session to remind us of this episodic feel, to remind us of the source material. So over what I project to be the life of this campaign, we're going to get to know this average family a little bit, and the dynamic between mom and dad and the kids. So when we do push in on the television and enter into the episode, Then our XO presents to us our opening narration. We have our own opening narration, which has been presented in early recaps. That is our beginning ritual to set the stage for what's about to begin. This particular episode opened with the Chief of Security, Topora, a Vulcan, and Lieutenant Marcus Duval, our executive officer, heading to the holodeck in order to do some training. What they discovered when they got to the holodeck was that people were already there running their own training program, and it had run longer than it should have. The atmosphere that we want to portray about our ship, the USS Crow, is one of professionalism and dedication. And so this is the first little hook to get the episode going. It's out of place for a group to be running late. And so a quick investigation ensues. Who is using the holodeck? Why are they late? And it's discovered that the people operating within are members of the Marine troop that has been assigned to the Crow as a part of its mission, the military aspects of its mission. Now, this Marine crew, they report or they liaise with the Chief of Security. So this will be our first introduction to Lieutenant Carson Rogers, which also comes with another little hook. Lieutenant Rogers is of a higher rank than Junior Lieutenant Topora, who is the Chief of Security. So, once the holodeck doors are open and once all of these people are interfacing with each other and the medical staff has rushed to the scene to deal with the accident, it's discovered that they have been training with the holodeck safety protocols removed. More investigation reveals that they have been slowly escalating the danger level of their training routines ever since they left what we're calling known space. They want to be as sharp as they can be, but they've pushed things to the point where two of their core have been injured by simulated phaser fire in the holodeck and need medical treatment. This begins an investigation into the training methods, into the methodology of Lieutenant Rogers, and so on and so forth. But this investigation itself gets interrupted. It gets interrupted by a mysterious alien signal. The signal is coming from a very unusual stellar body that has already attracted the attention of the stellar cartography group and the captain, who is a very dedicated explorer, not as interested in the high probability of military action that their assignment is likely to cause. So the temptation of this unusual stellar body has already been pulling her toward slowing their course and investigating. And as a reminder, in the previous episode, they have taken what basically amounts to prisoners, a group of pirates from a previously uncontacted species that they've taken to calling the Aquans, and they're taking them back to their homeworld to, one, see what that homeworld is like, what are all Aquans pirates, and that sort of thing, to make first contact. And they're hoping that on the journey to the Aquan homeworld, they might be able to learn more about this region of space from their, slightly unappreciative guests. But this signal from this unusual stellar arrangement sweetens the deal beyond the point of resisting. And they can't determine what the signal is trying to tell them, but they're reacting as though it is a distress call, because their long-range scanners, because of their highly trained crew members, are able to detect that there are two ships in trouble, and the stellar phenomenon to which I'm referring is a trinary black hole. The peril is extreme. At this point, things in the session begin to accelerate. We move from the Chief of Security's office up to the bridge, and there we join in with her into the research which will determine if and how the Crow can be involved in a rescue. The idea that it's maybe not a rescue mission is quickly abandoned as one of the 2 alien vessels, which in Star Trek Adventures terms are smaller than the Crow. It's scale 5 in my version of the Cheyenne class starship, and they are scale 3. But one of them is slipping across what the crew has already identified as a point of no return. Like beyond that point, the crew is essentially 100% satisfied that they will be unable to complete any kind of rescue mission. It's too late for that ship. However, can they do something about the other ship? The signal is continuing to be broadcast, but the universal translator is not able to make heads or tails out of it. So the linguistics department is called up. T'Pora is dedicating her attention to that, and our ops manager is beginning to run through scenarios for how the ship can prepare itself for what's ahead. The ops manager, Bishop, is our third main character. We have our executive officer, we have our chief of security, and we have our ops manager. The captain, or the commander, is a support character who can be played by anybody. The other major character who will feature, but not in this session, is the chief engineer, and we'll talk about him when it's appropriate. So throughout the ship, all these different departments are being tapped to participate in this investigation as the ship prepares to lend aid. Primary among them, the linguistics department, stellar cartography, astrophysics, and this sort of thing. The chief of security, in her bridge position, not only has the tactical console, but she's also responsible for the communications console. So she's also been intimately involved with liaising with the science officer, who does have a background in linguistics, trying to deal with this signal. But it occurs to her that why not try an outreach one more time to the Aquans? And she heads down below decks. The Aquans have been sequestered away. They are a little too dangerous to allow to circulate freely en masse with the crew. So she makes her way down, she takes a security contingent, she moves in, and she asks them if they will assist. And they're, of course, no problem. They're happy to assist if, once again, they can be provided with a ship. As a negotiation tactic, that's simply a non-starter. Not only is the Crow not carrying a vessel appropriate for their needs, there's just simply no way that the captain or the crew would ever trust them with it. Now, that's not the end of things. T'Pora is a pretty cagey individual. She's well trained in interrogation and investigation. So, while she doesn't get a translation of the message, she does quickly realize that the Aquan she's interrogating understands it. Not only that, he lets slip that it's definitely a distress call. So, with that in mind, she breaks off the interrogation, sends him back into the holding cell. She goes back up to the bridge to get involved there, where information is beginning to pour in. Information that reveals that they have more than just the trinary black hole to wrestle with, more than just the incredible gravity. There is, on top of everything else, a massive ion storm, which was due to hit these 2 imperiled ships in about 30 minutes' time. It's also been determined that if the Crow follows all the rules, at least what the cadets learned in Starfleet Academy, it will take them at a safe approach, taking no risks, it will take them a similar amount of time to reach those same coordinates. That is patently unacceptable. They need to get there faster. And as this episode comes to a close, desperate activity is detected from the 2 alien vessels. The farthest one, the one which is crossing over the point of no return, the one which the crew has already recognized they may have to give up on, is launching lifeboats. Lifeboats which have been enhanced, thrusting at an incredible amount of force away from their stricken vessel and leaping out toward their sister ship, which is attempting to grab them up in a tractor beam net. And as these tractor beams play out, gathering up all or maybe only most of the pods, they get their first real indication of the level of technology of this warp-capable civilization. A level of technology which does not reach their own, maybe decades, closer to a century behind them. But more than that, they gain insight into the nature of these two crews who, undaunted, are risking everything bravely, resisting this terrible situation which has befallen them, not giving an iota, raging, as it were, against the dying of the light. And so, this episode comes to a close, looking out the main view screen of the Crow at this desperate attempt to survive. And decisions have to be made. So, session 1 was conducted as normal, as expected. It ran about 90 minutes, and it opened up with the crew interacting with each other in a more social environment, which quickly flips on its head and becomes something challenging, as you'd expect from that period of television in this genre. Then we have to identify what the problem is. Then we need to tap different crew members who at the beginning of the session didn't exist, but using Star Trek Adventure's system of creating supporting characters were quickly drafted into action, and at any point any one of the player characters could take on the role of these characters we are creating. So there is no point where we have to have a player sitting out waiting their turn. In every scene, it's possible to have every player in action. And one of the interesting things about Star Trek Adventures is that the development of character has been completely changed. Rather than collecting a number of experience points and improving skills and improving attributes and things like that, as each episode comes to a conclusion, as your campaign progresses, the characters do change. They don't necessarily improve. There are opportunities for improvement, don't get me wrong. But what happens more often is a change in focus, so that how you're using your character right now is what they become good at. But what you have stopped focusing on never really goes away, and it's really, really interesting and refreshing. You are playing characters who are at a peak of performance. They're not really going to improve beyond that, but they will become more and more relevant to wherever it is or to whatever it is your campaign becomes. And this is something I'm going to be thinking about a lot as we play this campaign. So, when you step into the role of a support character, you're not giving up very much in terms of performance. And the more that support character is involved in episodes and in elements in the campaign, the more competent they become. So it becomes more, who are we looking at in the crew and what are they doing right now? And as I said, we never have to have any one of the players sitting out waiting their turn. They can always be useful. They can be useful in a scene by offering assistance, by interacting with people who are taking the lead in an action, or by taking on the role of a crew member who's directly relevant to that particular task. I like this quite a bit, and in this session saw quite a lot of use of it as we began to identify what we would need to investigate, and as we dealt with the issue of how quickly are we willing to close with these two alien vessels. If we close too fast, if we're not really sure of where we're going to end up, we might be as trapped as they are, needing to escape ourselves or needing aid ourselves. And if we take too long, there's no telling how many of these aliens will be lost. So, session 1, although primarily investigative, opened with a bang. When we began session 2, we thought it would be a normal session and run just as long as the previous one, around 90 minutes. However, this didn't turn out to be true. It ran only for about an hour. However, due to the nature of the players and how well everybody knows each other and how well they know Star Trek and how well they know me, I guess. And because of the system itself, we ended up getting quite a lot done. Not a lot of time passed, meaning that 30-minute window before disaster strikes the 2 alien vessels. Not a lot of that time was used up. However, we zoomed in on different groups of people doing different things inside the Crow and getting things in motion. So, what happened? This is what happened. Session number 2 actually began with a small retcon, and so there'll be a little bit of commentary here before getting into the pure recap. And the retcon was simple. The very last scene of Session 1 actually had our executive officer, Lieutenant Duvall, stemming up and tapping Mohammed, our helmsman, on the shoulder to take a seat. Duvall was going to guide the Crow into this perilous situation to begin rescue operations. Duvall's background is as a con officer, as a helmsman. But in the week in between Session 1 and Session 2, this really didn't sit right with me. And I was focused on how the rest of the crew would perceive it. Yes, the XO is a very experienced helmsman, but so is Mohammed. Mohammed is not a lesser member of the crew. He's a vital and valid part of the crew. That's how we need to see the supporting cast. So I talked about this with Lawrence, and he quickly agreed, especially because what he chose to do would earn him much more attention, positive attention, which will then convert toward earning reputation for promotion. So, when we open up this scene, what we have instead is Lieutenant Duvall doing these navigation calculations in his head and then moving in and working with the navigator and the helmsman to guide the Crow in better and possibly more safely, certainly in far less time than a strict adherence to protocol might allow for. Now, actually, the actual beginning of the session was, again, we thought this would be a full-length session and would be part 2 of 2 instead of part 2 of 3. And so this was the return from the mid-episode commercial. Dad comes back in from the kitchen, settles down on the sofa with the family. He's holding some kind of near beer or malt liquor or something, and he mentions casually how interested he is in seeing the captain on the screen more, so the family knows that he thinks she's quite attractive, that kind of thing. And then we zoom in on the screen, and the screen shot zooms in on the face of the XO as he's doing these mental calculations. And then we launch into the episode. There's no opening narration or log report or anything like that because we've just come back from commercial. That's the conceit that we use for our second session. So, the bridge crew, all trained professionals, are throwing themselves into things. The Topora at the communication station is working with the linguist to crack the signal and trying to establish communication. To support that, the ops manager, Bishop, is trying to figure out a way to break through all the static and distortion and all the things that are preventing them from being able to hail the other ship. Below decks, the engineering crews are getting ready for repairs, emergency procedures, and what they expect will be some kind of boarding mission to facilitate getting survivors off of the damaged ships. Everybody is getting ready, and they have 30 minutes until this massive ion storm hits. Because of the XO's careful assessment of the situation and advising and liaising with the helmsman and the navigator, they're going to shave 15 minutes off of their transit time. They're going to arrive with 15 usable minutes before the storm hits. So, the bridge officers, in coordination with the captain is, or the commander, the captain is taking a step back. She knows that Duvall is bucking for promotion. She knows that she's nearing retirement. He is her protege. This is a rescue mission, and she's taking not exactly a hands-off approach to it, but she's putting him on point. He's in the lead of figuring this out. This puts Duvall squarely in the eye of everyone aboard the ship. He's the one who has to make all of the hard decisions. But Bishop and Topora, they're on the front lines of people who are actually doing things. Duvall is working more as a coordinator or liaising between all the different departments he's set in motion aboard the ship. Anywhere you go aboard the ship, of course, you can be in coordination with anyone else. So, as the clock is ticking down, they are quickly assessing all the information that comes in. And this is where Bishop begins to take a focal point in play. Bishop, guided by Duvall and informed by piece by Topora and the science officer Pox, he starts to collate all the information together into a coherent picture of all of the dangers awaiting them, both externally to the two alien vessels and internally. Now, while he's putting this picture together, Pox and Topora have a breakthrough with the signal. It's not a complete translation, but it's enough to allow real communication. Although some of the things it presents seem to be more symbolic or metaphorical. They just simply don't have time to delve into them. So, for example, one of the pieces of information they get is that this group of people refer to themselves as the Bedivere Council, or members of the Bedivere Council. Why was that particular name, Bedivere? Why was that chosen? What does it represent? Like I said, there's no time to dig into it. As this breakthrough is made, things start to snowball. We get a deep scan of the alien vessel, which is only going to get clearer. We make first contact through the vid screen with a ranking officer aboard the stricken bridge of the nearer alien vessel. It's clear they're at red alert and they're suffering power failures, and there's all kinds of system strain. There's sparks and there's fire and there's smoke in the background. They make first contact, and as these scans are coming in and as communication is established, Bishop is able to guide them in how to better regulate their power flows in order to minimize the cascading effect of all of these system failures, buying everybody more time. While they had hoped that this species or this group would have access to transporter technology, what they discovered that they do have the technology, although on a more limited scale than what they possess themselves. That is one of the many systems aboard the ship which has suffered devastating effects from the environment. It's described as a smoking hole. So, the first idea of an away team is posed. The XO is going to take a team of engineers and pattern enhancers over to the alien vessel and begin transporting the wounded off and onto the Crow. So the medical team is dispatched to one of the cargo bays, which is turned into a temporary triage. Now, why is that necessary? We'll get to that in a second. Bishop is going to coordinate repairs and modifications aboard the Crow, and the chief engineer, who is a Tellarite who has taken a human name for reasons that allow him to rant and vent and curse people out. He will be going on the away team with the XO to conduct the same modifications there. But what is happening? As the Crow is nearing, as it's getting into range of the surviving alien vessel, a miniature wormhole briefly opened on deck 10 and dissolved a sphere of matter there, 5 meters in diameter, causing power interruptions, causing chaos in sickbay, destroying, or at least erasing, the existence of 2 crew members. what other perils are going to await. Tipora and the science officer, Pox, are pulled away from their translation and communication duties and are sent to coordinate with the Marines in clearing Deck 10 and helping to set up this emergency triage in cargo bay. While that's going on, the ops manager is gathering together his team to work aboard the Crow, gathering together all the tools and materiel that they need in order to make the changes that they need to enact a 3-part plan. Part 1, equip the Crow to broadcast power. Part 2, hook it up so that it actually functions. Part 3, if they have time, install a regulator so that this can run without much human oversight and can automatically shunt any problems which might arise when and if the ion storm hits. This 3-step program needs to be mirrored aboard the alien vessel. So while all of this is being coordinated, while all the gear is being gathered or replicated and prepared, disaster happens on Deck 10. So this second session, which was, as I mentioned, intended to be the end of the episode, turned out to be a bridging episode between the beginning and the end. There was a lot of roleplay. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of character moments, tension, and even the planning scenes were tense and quite short. And as they were being conducted, everything was counterpointed by very specific tasks, and these tasks tended to connect one to the other because of the concept of momentum. As momentum was earned in a role, characters are empowered to go the next step, and then what they have been accomplishing contributes in some way to the next project, and so on and so forth. And so as I'm sitting back, kind of keeping track of time and establishing a through line of all of these plans, all these attempts to gather information, and all of these efforts to coordinate the different teams together, roleplay is just springing to life, fully informed by the player's experience with Trek and Treknobabble. So it was a lot of fun. While in terms of what happened in this session, we're pretty much stuck with decision-making and the wormhole, there was an awful lot of engagement. We were focused on each other and on the dice throughout. It was kind of cool. I call this particular session fairly successful, even though it was so short. My takeaway from it was that I really wanted to accomplish more in that session, but there was a point where I recognized we were only going to have about an hour to play, that I pulled back on the things that I wanted to introduce. I didn't spend much threat at all during this particular session, because to do so would begin to escalate events in a direction, and I would have to cut them off in the middle. Not really a cliffhanger kind of experience, but a we've been interrupted kind of experience. And I opted to step away from that so that it felt like the middle section of an episode. That seemed to work out all right. I don't know if I would want to do that every time, though. The third session was not conducted face-to-face. Rather, it was conducted online via Hangouts, and this is not an experience that I'm in a rush to repeat. There are a lot of moving parts, and this particular part of the episode involved a new section of rules that I wanted to carry out the first time the right way. So I had a series of notes that I wanted to draw from. So the combination of checking my notes, role-playing through this screen with the lag that Hangouts provides and all the distractions that people being in their own homes provide, it gave me as the game master a very unsatisfied feeling. I really didn't like it. I won't be doing it again. I may figure out a different way to run Star Trek Adventures Online, meaning if I run Star Trek Adventures Online in the future, I'll be doing very specific types of situations, not this type. That's all. What happened in the session was incredibly satisfying. It's just, I really didn't like how I ran it. So, what happened? Let's talk about it. The third session began with the away team beaming over to the alien vessel. Now, this is without any kind of communication. All communications had been lost. The ion storm hadn't actually hit yet, but communications had started out bad, briefly cleared up, and then had gotten worse again. This is part of how I was spending threat, part of how the environment actually was behaving, and other factors along these lines, not the least of which was the heavy damage done to the Bedivere vessel. So the aliens, who we have come to call the Bedivere, members of the Bedivere Council. We were talking about their ship as the Bediverian ship. This kind of language has evolved naturally. They were very welcoming during our hails, but how are they going to react to aliens beaming directly aboard their ship in time of crisis? That would remain to be seen. As that mission is being launched, the ops manager, Bishop, is at the main deflector dish, rigging it up to be a power transmitter. While that's going on, the security chief, Topora, is getting ready for survivors to be beamed across, working with the Marines, working with the normal security crews, working with the medical personnel, so on and so forth. It's a very, very busy time. The bulk of this session was taking up with actually rigging the Crow to do what it needed to do, and rigging the Bediverian ship to do what it needed to do. So here's the situation. We have 10 of these souped-up lifeboats which did successfully bridge the gap and were caught in a tractor beam net, which could fail at any time. The power systems aboard the Bediverian vessel are strained to the maximum. Systems are dying all over the ship. The ship is suffering the same kind of perils that the Crow is: wormholes, debris, discharges of unknown energy, and on and on and on. The worst part is when gravitic waves, as the trinary black hole, works its magic, its science fiction based magic, and causes the vessel to shudder. Things started out hard and terrifying and only were getting worse. Into this comes the engineering crews. Now, the engineering crews are just like everyone else aboard the Crow. These are people who are operating at peak efficiency, dedicated professionals. But we got to see two different teams in action, and I really liked this because, well, we got to see two competing philosophies. Aboard the Crow, Bishop began to prepare the main deflector dish to broadcast power. He then had to create a power coupling to hook it up to the engines, and then, if he had time, was to create this regulator, a power regulator, which would protect the Crow should something go awry with this transfer of power. Chief Engineer Turnbull was going to do a similar thing aboard the alien vessel, the Bediverian vessel. He had to rig up a receiver, connect that to the ship's power system, and likewise hook up a regulator if he had time. But these two trained engineers do not see things the same way. Turnbull is very much by the book, safety first. If something is not safe, or if risks are being taken, if corners are being cut, he throws up roadblocks and opposition. In game terms, he's set up as a non-player character, and when I run him, I have the choice of having him generate momentum and add to the crew's momentum pool, or generate threat. He's either with them or against them, depending on what it is that they're doing. So on the Crow, we see Bishop working easily with his team members and coordinating well with the engineering crew throughout the ship, getting things done. He knows exactly what it is he needs. This is, while not exactly a routine task, they're not inventing new technology, they're not inventing a new procedure. They are doing something they know is possible. This is something that we can easily imagine Bishop having done before. And so piece by piece, step by step, everything falls into line. And in conjunction with some incredible rolling, he was able to, while not decrease the time it required, he was able to do things without hesitation, without missing a beat. It's like Engineer, please do the near impossible. Sir, yes, sir, the near impossible has been completed. It was a very, very cool and character affirming situation. Aboard the alien vessel, aboard the Bediverian vessel, a similar amount of success was achieved, but very, very differently. First, a survey had to be made, and once everything was assessed for safety to the people who were still aboard the ship and to the away team, only then would Turnbull begin to work. This caused a great deal of stress. But through the efforts of the executive officer to coordinate with the Bediverian engineers, and with his command of the full picture, so that by the efforts of the engineers aboard the Bediverian vessel, communication could be enhanced, boosted, and ultimately re-established. This moment of tension between the two departments turned into what ultimately led to triumph in this situation. So, working through what were very difficult problems, both teams managed to do all three tasks which were before them. However, they didn't complete them until the storm hit. When the ion storm hits, shields need to go up, but the Bediverian vessel no longer has shields, and there's no time to rig any kind of shield generator, and there's no awareness that it has no shields until they're needed. Systems are collapsing all over the ship. Turnbull and his guys now need to begin repairs. Now, no one else has been sitting on their hands while all this is going on. This is just our focal point. As soon as the EXO made first contact with the Bediverian crew when they beamed aboard, without permission, he very quickly won them over, established trust, got our engineers working in coordination with their engineers, and initiated transports. They begin beaming survivors and the injured off the Bediverian vessel. At least some people are going to survive if the Crow survives. But there's still this concern about the tractor beams. Any minute now, the Bediverian's power supply may fail. The tractor beams will be lost. The escape pods will be pulled into the trinary black hole. A horrifying way to go. So every step is being taken to make sure that people can be rescued as fast as possible. So it's with a great deal of triumph that this Plan A pulls off without a hitch. Plan B had been to fly in more of a cowboy nature, position themselves over the pods, use every tractor beam available to try and rescue all the pods while they're using transporters to gather up the rest, and then put themselves into a position to apply tractors to the Bediverian ship. Much, much riskier for the crew, much, much riskier for the Bediverian crew. They played it safe. They played it efficiently. They pushed and pushed and pushed to do things as fast as possible, but correctly. So now, tractoring the Bediverian ship, navigating against the incredibly high difficulties that the ion storm and other gravitational effects were causing to be leveled against them. They have Muhammad bring the two ships very close together. They extend their shields around it. The ion storm hits. Boom. Now they need to begin making their way back. With a steady stream of power, they begin to draw in the escape pods and begin to transport the survivors off of them. The medical personnel are, working great guns to deal with assessing all of the injuries. And inch by inch, they begin working their way away from the trinary black hole. And that's not as easy as it sounds. Power costs were increased by the environment. Navigational difficulties were increased, and debris fields are now beginning to present themselves as they're moving away carefully with their precious cargo inside their shields. They have to deal with asteroids and larger debris. This challenge is fully capable of battering the Crow to pieces, bringing the shields down, and destroying both vessels. So with great care, they have to make their way out under incredible strain to the engines and its power supplies. They need to make their way out. It's not over by a long shot. This is where Topora once again steps into focus, and guiding the phaser crews begins demonstrating her accuracy, her calmness and control as a Vulcan security officer, and blazes and blasts their way out, piece by piece, step by step. But still, wormholes and gravity waves present obstacles, the ship shaking its inertial dampeners, unable to keep up with the rapid shifts in the environment. And one of the crow's 4 nacelles winds up being damaged as another micro wormhole manifests inside it. No horrific explosion and death of all, but significant damage which needs to be repaired. As this episode draws to an end, they successfully navigate away from this hazard, full of lots of interesting scientific data to keep the commander happy, and with a very grateful alien crew. The last scene of the episode is one where the crew members from the Bedivere vessel thank the crew of the Crow and reveal that they had been on a mission of mercy of their own, headed toward a planet which had suffered some kind of ecological collapse, and they were hoping to be able to lend aid, but a lot of the aid that they were bringing, a lot of the technological support that they were bringing had been lost with their sister ship. It was left unspoken. Will you help us help them? And of course, the crew of the Crow leaps to take that opportunity, an opportunity for first contact to spread goodwill about the Federation and help people in need. So, this was a longer period of time to run this episode than I thought, only slightly longer in terms of playtime, but it had moments of real satisfaction where we got to see the characters really, really challenged and meeting that challenge, and seeing the players being challenged with a new system and bringing together their understanding of how it works and how its resources work, and using that to create drama, tension, teamwork, and ultimately success. I was pretty happy with the episode overall. There were some low points based on implementation, based on still struggling with the layout of the book, and whenever it is that I can't remember something, knowing that I'm going to be frustrated going into the text looking for that answer. My notes can't cover everything. I'm one who prefers to work from memory and with the actual book when I'm in a learning position. So that part of it has not been very enjoyable. But with each session, and as my familiarity with it, my grasp of the rules increases, that frustration is decreasing. And so I can easily see the time when I'm no longer frustrated running the game, but I'm still very much in that moment right now. It's hard to talk about it without mentioning it. So we're pretty happy with Star Trek Adventures. The characters have reached the point where they have distinct personalities. The players are able to predict some of the things that the characters might do. The support characters and the non-player characters are developing personalities, are being referenced, are being brought into scenes continually and logically. So I'm very satisfied with where we're standing right now at the end of episode 2. And the big showcase for this episode took place in part 3, in session 3, and that was the extended roles. Extended roles are in a lot of different games out there, and they are presented, for the most part, quite casually. And maybe they're presented just with the distinction of, if it's important, under time pressure, how long it takes the player characters to be able to do something. Or if it's telling you the player characters want to do something immense, and you'll need to do an extended role in order for them to achieve that immense thing, and one role equals this much time, right? So that everyone has a benchmark of what an investment of, and it keeps coming back to time, this is. Star Trek Adventures is not significantly different in that regard, but it's far more granular than you might be used to seeing. And I really like that granularity, as anytime a system builds itself this way, it gives you lots of hooks into character and scene for roleplay. What went wrong? What went right? Who was involved? When did they become involved? When did problems arise, or when were they squelched, and that sort of thing. This gives you a lot of tools to turn what could be a series of plain roles into a focal point for role play. And it doesn't really matter what it is. It could be the invention of a new device. It could be repurposing a device into something else. It could be an investigation. It could be the creation of a retrovirus. It could be a medical examination of survivors, and so on and so forth. There are so many things that the extended task rules can be applied to, and all of them open for really deep exploration where the characters conducting that extended task can shine as their occupation in the way that you would expect a combat character to shine in a combat. Is something that we haven't really seen very much from very many games, even if they have extended task rules of some kind. Now, with all of that praise, still, the game warns you, saying, use these things sparingly. Because if you don't use them well, if you don't use them appropriately, if the players don't care about the task at hand, this is a direct road to boredom. And they're not wrong. You have to be careful when you apply extended roles, extended tasks in your game session. So, really, really very impressed with this part of the game. And they give you a lot of support, probably the most support of any single part of the game, for things like upgrading or improving existing equipment, inventing equipment out of nowhere, and conducting step-by-step deductive investigations. So, a lot of praise to the people who put that together. So for us, what that meant was I put together a challenge, that 3-part challenge. Now, I knew that at some point during this rescue, some kind of extended task would need to be made, just because of how complicated the scenario was. I didn't know going into the session what that extended task would be. And because the second session was broken up into 2 sessions, I was able to finely tune what those tasks were going to be between sessions, because we didn't actually get to the extended task in session 2. So that was nice, but I could have been able to do it on the fly just as easily. An extended task involves task roles, normal task roles that work just like any other task role in the game. And if successful, the character who has done the task gets to apply the 6-sided challenge dice, not to produce damage like they would in combat, but to produce work, units of work. It's pretty easy. Now, that means that any task that they are undertaking will have some kind of intrinsic difficulty, and that remains true. If they're very successful, they might be able to use their player resources to reduce the difficulty or reduce the amount of time it takes to do that part of the task. There's ways that they can modify the outcome, all of which is very interesting because you're asking them how they're doing it, who they're doing it, what do they require, etc. Not all difficulties represent the entirety of the problem. So there's a characteristic called resistance. This works like armor would in combat. We create a certain amount of work, and the resistance to that work will erase some of the work that's been generated, just like armor will reduce damage. So that's pretty interesting. And your resources as a player have ways to modify that resistance, possibly even completely overcoming it as you work your way through the task. So, but it's not all about just generating work. There's another aspect to it called breakthroughs. Breakthroughs represent getting a lot of successes, 5 actually, all in one go. And if you can do that, completing the extended task from the player side accelerates rapidly. And if you can't do that, the system has a method in place, likewise, to accelerate the task from the player side so that you can handle it rapidly. It does its best as a mechanic to reduce the number of rolls and the impact that makes on your session. But the entry point into making that happen is role-playing through it. So as I'm a big proponent of role-playing what roles represent and what results represent, this is a very satisfying part of the game to get into play. They're easy to set up, and once set up, they're easy to implement or modify in play. What you're really looking at is how much work. They suggest doing it in 5s. You don't have to. You could have 6 or 7 work involved in the work track. They give you a maximum of 20 and a minimum of 5 as recommendations. So that's the work. Does the work have resistance? Right? Is it harder to do this because of the environment? And if it is harder to do it because of the environment, what are some things that the players can do to have their characters reduce that resistance? That's a very cool part of the system. There are the number of breakthroughs required. This can be done really easily. If you had 15 work, then they would need 3 breakthroughs in order to fully complete the task. This is referred to as its magnitude. And then, of course, there's the actual difficulty of the task. And there's lots of suggestions provided that in the book, plus your own feel for how difficult it's going to be. Is this something that they should be able to just do? Or is this something that they'll need assistance to do? Or is this something that they'll need to really handle carefully, step by step? So the system informs you about all of this, and all of this leads into role play. So very satisfying. And that ends our second session, Siege Perilous. If the things like the Bedivere Council and Siege Perilous seem familiar to you, that's great. We're going to be seeing those elements later on in the campaign, probably. And if they don't, well, don't worry about it, because we're probably going to be seeing them later on in the campaign. The campaign itself is next headed toward this world that's suffering an ecological collapse. They're going to go with the Bedivere, and they're going to conduct a crew exchange during the mission. So somewhere along that journey to this new world and its new opportunities for first contact, we are going to begin our session. Stay tuned, and thanks for listening if you've come this far.